Some people claim that the most important subject is not taught in any school or university. While there are courses in science and math and history and literature, there are no courses in wisdom. Perhaps that is why wisdom may be so rare. It is argued that far fewer people have wisdom than, for example, wealth, good looks, artistic or musical ability, athletic ability, or even a high IQ. A high IQ does not translate into wisdom. IQ tests don't measure wisdom. Indeed, German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer commented, "Every genius is in some way stupid. That's how he shows his kinship with the rest of humanity." This is the first in a series of programs I'm doing on wisdom and what famous thinkers in psychology, philosophy, literature, and religion have said about it. Among the questions I'll be addressing in this series are the following. What is wisdom? What might be the characteristics of a wise person? What might be a wise person's attitude towards the following? Money, life, other people, joy, and where to get it, conformity, being popular, fears, desires. Indeed, Professor Joseph Campbell has said this, desire and fear, all life in the world is governed by these two emotions. Well, again, how might a wise person go about dealing with his or her desires and fears? And also, what might be a wise person's attitude towards morality and death? Also, what might a wise person see that other people don't see? And how does one acquire wisdom? How does one know if one has wisdom? And finally, what might a wise person look like? Let's start with the first question. What is wisdom? Well, wisdom has been defined as good sense, good judgment, insight. It's also an understanding of what is true and false. It's also been said that wisdom is knowledge about the art of living. For example, the best way to deal with life's frustrations, the best paths to more tranquility, the process of emotional regulation. What's the relationship between wisdom and philosophy? Well, philosophy is the pursuit of wisdom. A philosopher is a lover of wisdom. Let me provide a sampling of what some of the famous thinkers have said on the subject of wisdom. Again, this provides a brief overview here at the outset of my series on wisdom. Socrates said this, "The many think pleasure to be the good. The smarter people say understanding." Goethe, the famous German intellectual, said this, "It is unthinkable that wisdom should ever be popular." And Nietzsche, famous German philosopher, commented, "Growth in wisdom may be exactly measured by decrease in bitterness." George Santayana, American philosopher, said this, "Wisdom comes by disillusionment." And Reinhold Niebuhr, very famous American theologian, composed the Serenity Prayer, which deals very much with the subject of wisdom. And here is the prayer. You've probably heard it. "God grant me the serenity to accept what cannot be changed, the courage to change what can be changed, and the wisdom to know what can be changed and what can't be changed." Novelist Henry Fielding, on the subject of wisdom, commented, "No man is wise at all hours. No man is wise at all hours." And the Reverend William Coffin put it this way, "Wisdom is never divorced from compassion, and Serenus, a thinker of antiquity, commented, "I imagine many people could have achieved wisdom if they had not already imagined that they had already achieved it." Aristotle claimed that wisdom is knowledge of the highest things. Aristotle said that wisdom is not knowledge of particular skills such as farming or sculpture. And I think a very famous former baseball player helps us to understand what Aristotle was talking about, again, when he said that wisdom is knowledge of the highest things. Darryl Strawberry, former baseball superstar, had his problems with alcohol and other drugs, and while in rehabilitation said this, "I know everything about hitting a baseball, but nothing about living." Socrates said, "The most important question any person can ask himself or herself is, how shall I live? How shall I deal with stress, fears, desires, for example?" Thoreau said that the aim of wisdom is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically. Epicurus, on the subject of philosophers, commented, "Vain is the word of a philosopher which does not heal any suffering of man." And Deepak Chopra, contemporary thinker, says this, "Wisdom is a consciousness, an awareness, a way of thinking. Wisdom is a way of seeing life and the world." What might be some of the characteristics of a wise person? Well, I think one of the characteristics of a wise person is this. He or she avoids avoidable unhappiness. The Buddha said that much of our pain is self-chosen. For example, I wonder how many people suffer from a bad self-image because they feel they're not keeping up with the Joneses and don't realize the pain they're bringing on themselves because they're not thinking clearly. Perhaps they've never really considered in a very thoughtful manner what standards they're using to judge themselves. And if they had wisdom, perhaps they wouldn't use the standard of keeping up with the Joneses to judge themselves, but would use, again, for lack of a better word, a wiser standard. Another characteristic of wise people, I suspect, is that wise people generally are skeptical people. They are doubters. Theologian Paul Tillich put it this way. Tillich said, "Doubt is the necessary tool of knowledge." An example of what Tillich was talking about. I think it's fair to say that wise people have doubts about television and the advertising industry's version of the good life. Another characteristic of wise people, I think, is that they tend to be inquisitive people. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Perhaps the $64,000 question each of us has to answer in his or her own life is this: is being a kind, just person in my self-interest? Again, is being a kind, just person in my self-interest? Or do nice guys finish last? Another characteristic of wise people. Wise people have a pretty good understanding of oneself, or I should say of themselves, life, and other people. Socrates and Freud both emphasize the idea of knowing oneself. In fact, one of the maxims that's come out of ancient Greece is, "Know thyself." Confucius said that wisdom, besides knowing oneself, involves having a good knowledge of other people, a good knowledge of human nature. Wise people also deal pretty well with frustrations, fears, anger, and lust. Seneca, very famous philosopher of antiquity, said that adversity is inevitable in life, that difficulties are a natural part of life, that no one can get through this life without doing a significant amount of suffering. Seneca put it this way. He said, "Life's no soft affair. Life's no soft affair." And the Tao Te Ching, very famous Chinese book of wisdom, says that we should not try to force life to work in a way in which it won't, that just adds to our daily frustrations. Self-discipline is also another characteristic of wise people. Wise people can exercise self-discipline in terms of eating, drinking, sex, and buying. And what do I mean by self-discipline? Well, I think it's fair to say that self-discipline often involves forcing ourselves to do things that are good for us, but that perhaps we are reluctant to do. For example, exercise on a regular basis. Aristotle, on the subject of self-discipline, said this. He said, "We should not consume so much as we want, but we should only consume as much as is good for us." Wise people also tend to use their time well. It's been said that, in general, wise people have a tendency to exercise their minds, bodies, and hearts on a daily basis. And when they talk about exercising the heart, they're talking about acts of kindness. Also, if wise people use their time well, it means, among other things, they are discriminating TV and internet users. Again, discriminating TV and internet users. They tend to be people who are not addicted to watching television or to the internet. I think it's fair to say that wise people also have a pretty good knowledge of reality. Indeed, if you were to ask philosophy professors what they believe is perhaps the chief characteristic of a wise person, I have little doubt that most professors, at least many professors of philosophy, would say that wise people have a pretty good understanding of the nature of reality. In other words, they have a pretty good understanding about what's true and what's false, about people and about life, and about the natural environment. Schopenhauer, whom I alluded to before, Schopenhauer was a very famous 19th century German philosopher. He said, "We all have mistaken ideas about different aspects of living." He said, "We all have blind spots. For example, we have blind spots about ourselves, marriage, being single, sex, other people, money, how to experience joy in life." The philosopher Santayana said that wisdom comes by disillusionment. Wisdom comes, in other words, by freeing ourselves from false ideas. How often we have heard middle-aged and elderly people say, "If I only knew at 20, if I only knew at age 20 what I know today." Again, another example of wisdom coming by disillusionment. I think it's fair to say that wise people also try hard to be just and moral people. So many of the great thinkers, including Confucius, Plato, Jesus, Buddha, Spinoza, Kant, and Bertrand Russell, have said that wisdom is never divorced from morality. Wisdom is never divorced from morality. Indeed, the philosophers Kant and Emerson claimed we have an inner need to be moral regardless of whether there is a God or hereafter. Again, we have an inner need to be moral regardless of whether there is a God or hereafter. What do you think? Buddha and Socrates and many others have claimed that the path to wisdom is not so much esoteric knowledge as it is a spiritual, moral project. Indeed, Seneca said that wisdom is not so much about acquiring knowledge as it is about transforming ourselves. For the benefit of those who tuned in late, you're watching Life, Love, and Philosophy. This is the first in a series of programs I'm doing on wisdom and what famous thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and religion have said about it. This program, incidentally, can be seen on Staten Island on Sunday evenings at 10 p.m. on Channel 35, and the program is repeated on Tuesday evenings at 8:30 p.m., also on Channel 35. Now back to what might be some of the characteristics of wise people. It's been said that wise people don't insist on certainty. They realize that there are very few things in life about which we can be certain. A disciple of Confucius said this about him. He said that Confucius refused to insist on certainty and refused to be inflexible. Which brings me to another characteristic of wise people, and that is they tend to be flexible people. They tend to be flexible people. On this subject, psychiatrist M. Scott Peck has commented, extraordinary flexibility is required for successful living in all spheres of activity. It's been said that the only constant in life is change. We are changing all the time. We are aging all the time. And things around us are changing. Hence, the need for all of us to learn to be flexible. And what are some examples of changes in life requiring flexibility? Well, I just mentioned the aging process requires it. Illness. Sometimes we suffer from a rather enduring illness, and it means we need to be flexible in our approach to life and what we can do and can't do when we are seriously ill. The death of a loved one requires us to be flexible and to make certain significant changes in life. If a job or business doesn't work out, that's going to require some flexible thinking and action on our part. Also, if a friendship ends or we are retiring from working a job for many years, that's going to require flexibility. A wise person is also a person who has tamed his or her mind. Indeed, the Dalai Lama has said that taming the mind is the most important task of one's life. What's that all about? Taming the mind. Well, the Buddhists use the expression mindfulness. They claim that what we must do is to achieve mindfulness, and the way one achieves mindfulness is by thinking about our thinking. The idea is that we should try in a very serious manner to reduce the anger in our lives, the greed, the lust. And the idea is to come up with antidotes to negative thinking. And if we do that, if we can come up with antidotes to negative thoughts, and if we can learn to think more positively, well, that is what taming the mind is all about. And wise people claim that can lead to a much more fulfilling kind of life. Wise people also aim at becoming less self-centered. The very famous Jewish sage, Hillel, put it this way. He said, "If I am not for me, who will be? But if I am for me only, what am I?" All the major religions stress the idea that becoming less self-absorbed leads to a more fulfilling life. Becoming less self-centered actually leads to a more joyful life. Also, a wise person's idea of success very often differs from an unwise person's idea of what it means to live a successful life. Wise people, at least the wise people in history, have claimed that success is a journey, it's not a destination. Success is how one lives every day. Success means trying to live in the present moment. So often, people tend to live in the future. They tend to think, well, gee, won't I be so happy when I graduate college? Or, won't I be so happy when I get married and have children? Won't I be so happy when I get a high-paying job? Won't I be so happy when I retire? And again, they're always putting off becoming happy. Indeed, so many of the philosophers have said that so many people keep projecting into the future and keep postponing happiness, that they don't live in the present moment and they don't get the joy and satisfaction that it's possible to get from the present moment. Thoreau put it this way. He said, to affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. And the Bhagavad Gita, very famous Hindu holy book, puts it this way. It advises people to be process-oriented, not results-oriented. The idea is when we are results-oriented, that leads to a lot of anxiety and frustration. Another question I wish to address myself to on this subject of wisdom is this. What do wise people want to know? Well, the Dutch philosopher Spinoza, who lived in the 17th century, I think provides a good introduction to the answer to this question. Again, what do wise people want to know? Spinoza said we need adequate ideas, ideas to live by. He claimed that adequate ideas help us to regulate our emotions. For example, adequate ideas, he said, help us to deal with our fears, our anger, greed, and lust. Whereas, he claimed, if we live according to inadequate ideas, we are then controlled by our emotions, rather than we controlling our emotions. Freud put it this way. Sigmund Freud said we can think ourselves into becoming less anxious. Again, Freud maintained we can think ourselves into becoming less anxious. What do you think? Socrates claimed that perhaps the most important thing wise people want to know is what's important in life. He said they emphasize the eternal, the unchangeable, in contrast to the transient. Socrates said that philosophers want to know the ever-same and unchangeable, whereas, he claimed, the masses of people are preoccupied with the transient. Today, for example, how many people clutter their minds with information about the Scott Peterson trial, the Michael Jackson trial, baseball players who are on steroids, celebrities who are getting divorced or on drugs. It's been said that many people tranquilize themselves with the trivial. Thoreau talked about the consequences of this. He said, the mind can be permanently profaned by attending to the trivial, so that all our thoughts are tinged with triviality. So many of the great thinkers have said that a person is what he thinks about all day. And again, are we preoccupied with the trivial, or do we take time out each day to think about the enduring, the unchangeable? That can lead to a much more spiritually oriented life, and I suspect a more joyful life. We, of course, need soul food in life. And what's soul food? Well, soul food is that which helps us to grow in awareness of ourselves, others, life, and what gives life meaning. And where can we get soul food? Well, among the places we can get it are the following. We can get soul food from great books, wisdom books. We can get soul food from people, especially people who have a skill at loving other people. We can get soul food from our own actions, specifically acts of kindness and affection. We can also get it from music, especially music that illuminates and inspires. And we can get soul food from very good conversations, therapeutic conversations with others. Wisdom seekers generally prefer to be deepened than amused. Wisdom seekers want to learn to see clearly. They want to improve their intellectual and spiritual vision. With increased awareness, the idea is that it's not that something different is seen, but that one sees differently. Again, if we can increase our intellectual and spiritual vision, our intellectual and spiritual awareness, it means that we will see ourselves, other people, and life differently. And indeed, if one is seeing differently, one might come to see that television and advertisements and video games cannot be trusted as a guide to a more fulfilling life. What is the TV and advertising version of the good life? Well, I think it's fair to say that TV and advertising emphasize the idea that we should try to impress the hell out of other people, buy expensive stuff. And also we should cultivate an image, be cute, or sexy, or macho, or prosperous, or sophisticated. Whereas, I think Shakespeare provided much wisdom when he had one of his characters say the following: "To thine own self be true." Quite the opposite of cultivating an image, a persona. I think Aristotle and Thoreau provide a good summing up. Aristotle, you will recall, said that wisdom is knowledge of the highest things. It's knowledge made complete. And Thoreau claimed that wisdom is knowledge of the highest of arts. And according to Thoreau, what is the highest art? Well, you will recall, he said the following: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."